Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. It's time for cash tags. For that, let's bring in our next guest. It's going to be Megan Brantley, VP of Research at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday to Spotify investors, because this stock's severely outperformed the overall market, doing pretty well, up about 22% this year. It is off its all-time highs that we saw a couple months ago. But Megan, is this one of those stocks and one of those subscriptions that you just don't get rid of no matter how much they raise the prices, right?
Yeah, this is a really, really sticky platform. Spotify is probably one of the best examples of leveraging AI to actually improve the overall product, because what it's done is it's really gotten to know its users. It's learned preferences and tastes, and it's pulled users in to make that sticky, because it's giving these recommendations that are right on. It's creating these playlists that are custom at the user level, and that makes it really nice, whenever a user wants to listen to some music, to not have to go through and individually select, okay, I want to listen to this song specifically. Maybe they can just select a vibe or a mood that they're in, and Spotify knows them well enough to serve up songs that they like. So this overall is a really good experience from a user perspective. So it's definitely given this company some pricing power. And another thing that Spotify has done really well is it's learned how to tier out these different subscription models that consumers can kind of buy into. So it feels like, even though some of these prices have raised, that consumers still feel like they're getting a good value. They can do the ad platform if they want to be ad supported and not necessarily have to pay. You can pay to remove those ads. You can have a duo plan if it's you and another person. You can have a family plan. So there's a student plan. There are a lot of entry points that Spotify can gain these users, and then they're really good at upselling and getting those users into those more premium tiers. And so I think that this is a company, like you said, really sticky, definitely high sentiment levels when we look at this, and impressive considering its massive user base, that on our data, when we look at this, we're still seeing some growth whenever it comes to overall web visits. And the reason that that's important is because this is where you can actually sign up for Spotify, right? This is when you're actually logging on to create an account, sign on to that tier, to pick your subscription. And we see those mentions up by about 3% year over year. So not crazy growth, but still growing, still momentum on the positive end on our side. So this is definitely one of those names that is seemingly tariff resilient right now. And, it's a nice service, and it's proving that even with this mass audience base, that it still has the ability to grow.
Megan, Tom, I think Spotify is the musical version of all you can eat. I think you pay one price and you get to use this as much as you want and create as many lists as you want and playlists. I'm an active user on Spotify. If this was an all you can eat, they're not making any money off me, Megan, because I use Spotify a lot all the time for many, many reasons. And I think in many ways, they have the ability to raise prices, Tom, like you mentioned. They may have an ability to negotiate better fees with artists, both really strong for them. And I think that this company should be a master thesis on the fact that they've basically made iTunes and Apple Music irrelevant. That's how good this invention was by them, Megan.
Yeah, whenever you look at that compare chart, you see Apple Music on there. And while Apple Music is certainly growing, we don't see major signs of people who are saying, I'm switching from Spotify to Apple Music. And if you were to put this in a pie chart and just say, okay, I want to look at the consumer mind share of Spotify versus an Apple Music, on our end, we have consumer mind share for Spotify at 85%. So that's a really, really big piece of the pie. This is a product that, at least among U.S. consumers, people really love. And, it's crazy that Apple literally had iTunes in the pocket of every consumer, and Spotify was able to swoop in and disrupt and create a subscription model where you're essentially paying for songs every month. I mean, it's brilliant. But like you said, you get the all-you-can-eat buffet, and you get a platform that knows you and anticipates songs that you'll like and kind of does that discovery for you. It's interesting, consumers used to discover new songs on the radio, and now I don't know anyone that really listens to the radio anymore that's discovering new artists there. So I think that this kind of just shows the leverage that Spotify has, like you mentioned, in terms of negotiation with artists. It has 675 million monthly active users. That's the more its user base grows, the more pricing power it has in every sense, whether it's on the artist side or the consumer side.
Yeah, you mentioned disrupt when Apple had iTunes and everybody was downloading and paying for songs. I think they destroyed Apple. And maybe that data that you have, Megan, Apple's coming from a low base at that point, because I don't know anybody that uses Apple Music anymore. But that being said, they got earnings at the end of the month, Megan. Stocks pulled back about 16% from those all-time highs that we saw just a couple months ago. I mean, you guys still positive on this one, even with the the headline risks to every other business that we're seeing out there.
Yeah, this does look like a company that is better insulated than most other companies whenever it comes to the overall market and just tariff exposure at large. But this is something that when we look at Spotify, we do see a little bit of a slowdown in that growth rate. 3% is still good, but it's not as high as rates that we've seen over the last year. So we actually think that this pullback, makes a little bit of sense right now for Spotify. We like where the stock is at now. I think it reports at the end of the month, so we'll have to see how the stock does. Until then, I think that will inform our earnings score a lot. But we have positive data, but think that it aligns pretty well with where the stock is trading at.
Yeah, if you overlay a Netflix chart with Spotify over the last 2 years, the correlation is uncanny. But Megan, that's typically what happens when you get, two of these subscription-based services in the entertainment side of the business that everybody uses and you're not going to give up, right?
Yeah, I mean, these are best-of-breed names. When you look at a Netflix, when you look at a Spotify, these are names that obviously the market likes. And so this is something that when we look at this, we're looking for signs of slowdown in growth, not to jump the gun and preview Netflix, but we are seeing a bit of a more severe slowdown in growth for Netflix but versus a Spotify. And part of that just could be due to like a content cycle. I think we could probably touch more on that next week. But for Spotify specifically, this has all the content. When they talk about their catalog, on its last earnings call, leadership says we essentially have all of the music catalog. That's what users can listen to on Spotify, and it's growing into other avenues. I think audiobooks is a big lever that it can pull in podcasts, video. And so these are different things that Spotify even considers as add-ons. So it's interesting to see, these revenue streams diversifying. And, one thing that we haven't touched on is advertising. Last quarter for Spotify, advertising grew at about 6% versus premium offerings or premium revenue at 19%. And Spotify admitted it was late to the game there. It expects to improve. So I think that that's another avenue for Spotify to tap into. That kind of helps bolster our positive outlook.
Yeah, and they just had some initiatives on the AI side to help with that advertising side of their business too. So that'll be a benefit also. All right, great stuff as always, Megan. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. You too.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, VP of Research at LikeFolio. Kev, like I said, this is one of those subscription services.